We all once believed in the distant past that only forbidden knowledge could give us enough power to defeat the heavenly principles. The Dragon King acquired the power of darkness from outside of this world and led us in a fight against the order established by the outsiders. An unimaginable war took place into that, causing destruction on an unprecedented scale. The world itself was on the verge of collapse.
The dragons, dragon sovereigns, and Nibelung, the Dragon King of old, could be the sinner, the leader of the abyss, and manipulating the Fatui. Could he be a descender, even though being from Teyvat, the second or the third descender? Do the Gnosis actually come from his body? And could actually be manipulating everything in Genshin Impact. Do you guys remember in a video not that long ago where I talked about Natlin and its plot, where the Fatui will revive the third descender with the Gnosis? And then listen to what Apep has to say, and listen to what Natlin has to say for its character teaser trailer.
The rules of war are woven in the womb. The victors shall burn bright, while the losers must turn to ash. When the god of war shares this secret with the traveler, it is because she has her reasons.
In war, the victor would inherit the right to shape the world, while the losers must turn into ash.
But how could the Dragon King Nibelung be a descender if he's from Teyvat? Or maybe it's the same way how our sibling is not from Teyvat and isn't a descender. Some weird shit's going on, let's talk about it. But let's start from the beginning. First, let's cover what we know. In the distant past, the Heavenly Principles descended on Teyvat and established a new world order. In an attempt to quell and defeat the usurper, Nibelung acquired forbidden knowledge. He left Teyvat, traveled into the abyss, got some untold dark powers as Apep kinda tells us, and tried to defeat the usurper, and inevitably lost. But was his essence killed? Is he truly just erased, or do we have some Ganondorf or Sauron type shit going on here, where he could be tainting and corrupting everything and everyone around him, manipulating everything behind the scenes to try to ultimately regain the throne of Teyvat and get his revenge. Obviously, we all know the history of Teyvat. The dragons ruled the land, and they were the inhabitants of Teyvat, the originals, Nouvelette's ancestors, until the primordial one came, defeated them, and created the Four Shades in humanity and Celestia. Obviously, if you didn't bend the knee, you had to flee into the dark abyss, and Kanomia or outside the laws or governing of Teyvat. Nibelung, the Dragon King, didn't take this loss so well, and it is said that he left Teyvat, in the abyss, in the void, in the darkness. It is very vague and very ambiguous, and they do this intentionally, but we don't really know where he went or how this all plays out. But we do know one thing. A second throne of the heavens came and battled with the primordial one, and apparently this whole conflict caused untold destruction. It sounds a lot like the same conflict Apep explains when Nibelung returned and went after the usurper. Untold destruction. So can it be safe to assume that this whole conflict is the same one? Just that it's different interpretations of the same fight. If so, then is Nibelung the second descender, the second who came, because he left Teyvat and came back? Or could he be the third descender? See, this is where they mess with us, because they've explicitly explained that descenders meet a certain criteria, and Nibelung shouldn't fit that criteria, but again, a lot of inconsistencies. How is our traveler not a descender, but also our sibling? Like, you see where I'm going with this? One way or another, they're messing with us, big time. They're tricking us, they're trying to mislead us in one way or another. Essentially, Nibelung acquired forbidden knowledge from outside the world and led the other ancient dragons into a war, believing this power was the key to victory. Instead, this war caused immense destruction at an unpredicted scale and led the world to the brink of collapse. Nibelung's war eventually ended and his entire race defeated and his own demise. With the right to shape the world, the heavenly principles cast down the divine nails to mend the earth after its destruction. However, this act also devastated the beings which had lived on the surface of Teyvat. even after seeing the former rainforest in the domain turned into the desert by the divine nail. Apep nonetheless attempted to turn the tides by acquiring more forbidden knowledge, but ultimately failed and only became more corrupted. So we see this pattern over and over again. We've seen this with King Deshret's civilization and forbidden knowledge and corruption. We've seen what it can do in Fontaine with Ilia the dragon from Conria. We've seen that what it can do to Dvalin when fighting enemies from Conria like Durin. Corruption from the abyss and abyssal powers and outside of this world forbidden knowledge and darkness seems to have a way to taint individuals that are from Teyvat or even possibly descenders. Now, there's a lot to kind of break down here, so let's try to simplify it. What actually happened? Nibelung actually be fully killed, or is his essence still alive? Is he pulling the strings behind everything we see in order to try to accomplish his ultimate goal to take down the usurper? Now, it's obviously been heavily speculated on who's actually the heavenly principles. Is it the sustainer? Is the sustainer actually the primordial one? Or does she just work under the primordial one? What's going on? Is the second who came actually Nibelung because he left and came back? Is it like some Scooby-Doo type stuff going on? I don't actually think so, because it is suggested from people like Nahida that she hypothesizes that the current heavenly principles is the primordial one. But the problem with this is there's so many inconsistencies in Genshin Impact's story, which is perfectly deliberate by Hoyoverse. They do this to mislead us. The primordial one has been known to be nothing but benevolent and good, yet apparently she's pretty terrible because the heavenly principle sucks. They're kind of a jerk. And casting down divine nails, whether it be to cleanse it or not, you completely eradicated the entire world. And then you decide to be somewhat of a dictator after that. See, there's inconsistencies here. So who's actually running the heavenly principles? Well, I do have a bit of a theory. What if Nibelung isn't the second descender, but actually brought them here? Because Nouvelette describes this conflict as an act of vengeance. And yes, Nibelung and the dragons would have a reason to take vengeance on the usurper because it was their world after all. But the second who came, if it's the same conflict and it was with the second who came, why would they have vengeance? They have no stake in this fight. They'd also be a descender. What would their vengeance be? Well, what if Nibelung corrupted that individual and brought them to Teyvat to usurp? After all, the dragons are 0-1 against the primordial one in his shades, so it makes sense that he'd bring some help, leaving Teyvat into the darkness and the abyss. And Apep sort of teases this, saying that he, dabbled in darkness and dark powers. So I'm sure that he was willing to do by any means necessary to win. Maybe he brought this second descender here. And that is how the conflict actually started. Because we've heard of two conflicts, the primordial one and the second who came, and the primordial one with the dragons. What if that conflict is all one and the same, and that Nibelung brought that individual here, but it is still his act of vengeance? So all of these stories we hear about this giant conflict that took place in the past is actually all the same one, just everyone's interpretation is a little different because it's all the same conflict with all of the same beings. So if this actually happened, did the second who came lose? Were they slain? Possibly. And if the primordial one actually did win, like everyone seems to think, and Nibelung was killed, or allegedly killed, and maybe his essence is what's pulling the strings in the current Teyvat, they say the Gnosis represents each element, so one of the dragon sovereigns per element, and then he was the king of the dragons. So could the Gnosis actually be from his body? Seeing as that he's native to Teyvat, but left and came back, could that make him a descender, the third descender perhaps? And maybe the second and third descender came together. The original Dragon King of Teyvat certainly would make sense because we know he was slain in that battle, and the descender, well, the third descender, the Gnosis are his remains, and the Gnosis being the absolute authority of the elements and of the nations, it makes sense that it would be from Nibelung, the Dragon King's body. But then, see, here's the problem. Why would he be a descender then? See, this is where Genshin likes to mess with us, and I think they added that detail about our sibling not being one to throw us off. It gives us a false sense of, establishment in this world, but yet they break their own rules all the time. I think the point of all these inconsistencies is that it's not actually supposed to make sense. It's supposed to mess with you. Now, I can't really suggest what exactly happened because anyone could guess all day long, but obviously we know that there was a conflict with Nibelung and he was killed. Whether he's classified as a descender or not, we don't know. I do, however, think he's manipulating things behind the scenes because we know dragon sovereigns can be reincarnated, and I do think he is responsible for showing Conria the ropes, getting them on board to, eradicate Celestia and all of Teyvat. It would make sense because Nibelung wouldn't care if all of humanity and everything in the world got destroyed in this collateral damage. His world was usurped. He has no love for everything created by the Primordial One and whatever came after. He could care less. And he could be manipulating the Fatui too, and trying to resurrect him in Natlan with the Gnosis, or some variation of this. Maybe he isn't the third descender, but he's still manipulating things behind the scenes. And he is the sinner. He's the great sinner. It's quite possible. Now, as for the Primordial One, if they did win that conflict, but yet now they're not so benevolent anymore, what happened? What if the Primordial One isn't the Primordial One anymore? What if they're so tainted and corrupted from this outside world forbidden knowledge and corruption that that's the reason why their deity turned on everyone and why the Heavenly Principles sucks now? What if they're just corrupted and this is Nibelung's long-term game? Because if he's the one pulling the strings, if he's the great sinner, if he's the one feeding Conria all this intel, all this forbidden knowledge, enticing them to unleash their monsters and eradicate Teyvat, if he's the one pulling the strings behind the Fatui, getting them to claim the Gnosis from the Archons that work for the Heavenly Principles, he's really just accomplishing his goal by being more passive this way. If he was reincarnated, like we know the Dragon Sovereigns don't necessarily just die and stay dead and never exist. They have descendants, and they reproduce or get reincarnated. What if you can't quite kill a Dragon Sovereign or Dragon King, but they just get recreated or their essence lives on in another form? If Nibelung was corrupted and dabbled in all of this dark magic and forbidden knowledge, then he would be able to pull the strings behind the scenes and everything that we see, causing the Heavenly Principles headache after headache, still trying to overthrow the usurper. And that everything we see, including the Abyss, Conria, our sibling, the Fatui, is all from him. And let's pretend for a second this is all true. Wouldn't that make more sense why the Heavenly Principles prevent the travelers from leaving? We've seen a Dragon Sovereign King leave, come back, and it was a nightmare for Teyvat. So it's better safe than sorry. So it was probably a safe bet to keep them here and not bring more destruction and forbidden knowledge back if they came back. Really, we have no idea what this all means and how this all ties together, but it has been heavily speculated for years now that whoever is in Celestia is corrupted and dying or injured. We've talked about this in videos before too. So if this is the case, the Nibelung actually is sort of like a Sauron or like Ganondorf Malice type character that's just an evil, dark, corrupted force that's maybe just tainting everything and everyone in Teyvat for years to ultimately always overthrow the Heavenly Principles. Obviously, it's hard to pinpoint because there's a million directions they could go with all these loosely based characters that we know little to nothing about and inconsistencies, but it would be kind of cool if he was the third descender and he's literally manipulating things behind the scenes to get his body resurrected with the Gnosis. So he's been controlling Conria, the Fatui, pretty much the outsource of forbidden knowledge, and all the technological advancements they made could have been something that he brought back when he was originally usurped long ago. A big, long endgame to get his revenge. And at this point, I don't even think the other Dragon Sovereigns are even aware or even would be on board with this. Like Apep said, she also tried to get Forbidden Knowledge to do the same thing, and she's still bitter. But she realized that it's not the way, and that just because you're angry and upset about it, killing everyone now, causing destruction and chaos, won't solve anything. A lot of the people alive today have no idea what happened in this entire history. But I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments. I do appreciate you watching this far. Thank you so much for your support. Feel free to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more like this. It's going to be interesting to get to Natlan and see what exactly happens there with this resurrection, whatever that might be. But again, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you all in the next one. Later.